All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis, podcast where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Floyd. How you doing, Floyd?
Yeah, not too bad, mate. Yourself?
I'm pretty good. Pretty good.
Yes.
Haven't suffered any hate crimes from our coming out as racist anti-Semites last week.
Not yet, but don't say or never say never. I think so. Could happen. Could be walking down the street and just get clobbered in the back of the head. But yeah,
Well, we can only hope, right? Um,
yeah, for sure. Sure. Well, I need some sort of retribution against me for being a evil person.
That's the great thing about having a tiny audience is that like I get to have my racist tirades, but it's
Mm.
unlikely that I'll ever face the consequences of them just yet. I'll face the consequences in like 25 years when I'm going for some other completely unrelated job and someone does some
Yeah.
digging into my past. So
I
um
don't know. I reckon this channel's about to blow up, man. So, just you get some hate watchers soon. I'm sure there's a hate watcher now. Dislike, if you hate watch, dislike it right now.
yeah, well, I mean hate watches. I'll take hate watches. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Um Well, speaking of the channel blowing up, there's all sorts of things blowing up right now, both
Oh,
literally
really?
and figuratively.
What
I
could
don't
those
know.
be?
Well, I mean, was that too on the nose as a segue? I mean,
No,
there's a
that was
literal
great.
war going on the other side. Is it too
No,
on the
that was the
nose?
no, it's not.
All right, we'll run with it.
There could be
Uh,
another segue we could do there, but I'm not touching that.
Why? Are you afraid of being controversial? Are you frightened of repercussions of being controversial, Floyd?
No, it's what type of controversial? It's like jokingly controversial or just like disagreeing with a lot of people.
Fair enough. All right.
I'd rather
You're
disagree with a lot of people, have that type of controversy than just like bad jokes, which I'll
sounds like
still
you're a
tell.
sounds like you're a little bitch, is what I'm hearing. But that's all right. We can remedy that. That's another thing that we'll dissect here on Collectivitis. Floyd's
I need
fear.
to be I need to be pushed to the edge so I can become the lord of that edge, have a little castle there and be my edge lord status.
The Lord of that edge. Yeah, cool. Well, let's edgelord our way right into the first topic, which is um quite serious, unfortunately. There's potential here for the outbreak of something close to World War III. There's some pundits saying that World War III has already begun with the Israel-Palestine conflict. So things are obviously heating up. Things are ramping up. The Israeli forces are looking to move in. There's, water and electricity have been cut off from Gaza, and the Hamas and the support for Israel around the world has been almost unilateral. Every Western country and most other sort of neutral-esque countries have gone, yeah, no, we have to support Israel. Israel, this is
Yep.
the most important number one thing. Anti-Semitism is the most horrific thing that you could be, because anti-Semitism is a worse type of racism than other racism, obviously,
Yeah.
except for voting no on the voice, which is the absolute pinnacle of racism. But anti-Semitism is a close second.
Well, I like the hierarchies of racism that come through. It's been really interesting to watch. Like, do you agree with some sort of racism? Do you not agree with some sort of racism? But yeah, anti-Semitism. I mean, you'll get shot for that. No, yeah, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, well, you'll shoot yourself in a bunker if you're an anti-Semite. It's the way Hitler
Or
went.
or,
So
or you're against the Clintons, one or the other.
yeah, yeah. Um,
I have
Funnily enough, I'm sure
I
the
am not suicidal, just for the record. I am completely happy with my life and yeah.
um, but yeah. So sorry to continue on that vein. The US has pledged kind of unilateral support of this, and I'll just play a short clip of Joe Biden saying what we all kind of suspected, that no matter what all the way to the end, the US is going to back Israel, which is a frightening thought. So I'll let him say it in his usual eloquent tone.
One way of putting it.
Yeah, one way of putting it.
Today, the people of Israel are under attack, orchestrated by a terrorist organization, Hamas. In this moment of tragedy, I want to say to them and to the world and to terrorists everywhere that the United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back. We'll make sure that they have the help their citizens need and they can continue to defend themselves. You know, the world's seen appalling images. Thousands of rockets in the space of hours raining down on Israeli cities. When I got up this morning and started this at 7:30, 8 o'clock, my calls. Hamas terrorists crossing in Israel, killing not only Israeli soldiers, but Israeli civilians in the street, in their homes. Innocent people murdered, wounded, entire families taken hostage by Hamas. Just days after Israel marked the holiest of days in the Jewish calendar. It's unconscionable. You know, when I spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning, I told him the United States stands with the people of Israel in the face of these terrorist assaults. Israel has the right to defend itself and its people. Full stop.
We'll leave him at full stop. What are your first thoughts on that?
I think that's the best Joe Biden has spoke in a very long time.
I was thinking the same thing. They must have gassed him up with some good drugs for this one. They were like, shit, this is a really important one. He's not just meeting the Pope and shitting himself at the Vatican, as was rumored that he did. No, this one could cause, you know, an enormous this one could cause us to not be able to enter a war. So, you know, everything's riding on this one. Let's gas him up with the good stuff.
Well, I reckon instead of smoking the meth, he just injected it straight up. So, or they injected it to him. You get more focus. Not that I know, but
so I mean the first most obvious thing, like, we will support Israel no matter what. No matter what happens here, no matter what fallout there is from these actions, we will support Israel. So the US getting in early and saying, if there's a war, we're in.
Yep.
Now, apart from the fact, okay, so a few asides. First of all, as you said, Joe Biden looks like he read that teleprompter spot on. That was some good teleprompter reading. It kind of gives me the feeling that, hey, he might make it to the election after all. It might actually end up being Trump Biden v2, which I was, you know, I'm skeptical of always, because at any given moment he could, one, have a heart attack and die, or two, be thrown under the bus.
Who, Trump or Biden?
Biden. I mean, they're trying to throw Trump under the bus constantly.
Well, Trump could have a heart attack as well. I mean,
Trump's looking fit.
Yeah, but I mean, he was a big advocate for the vaccine.
True. Yeah. Well, they're all dead in the next 5 years because of the vaccine. Anyway, we're all dead. All of those of us who I'm not. But you know, those who did take it. But apart from that, so I mean, the US saying absolutely we're going to war here. Now, the first kind of aside that you have to think is, okay, I don't know. I've done a lot of kind of absorbing of this stuff in the last week because I've had to. Because if I want to talk about something like this, I need to be at least a little bit informed. And the first thing that becomes apparent is that it's not always obvious the disparity in the level of military forces that are in conflict here. Israel is an advanced military force comparable to anything in the West and has the support of the West. Gaza and Palestine are like Hamas is a terrorist organization, you know, where they throw homemade rockets and stones because they have nothing else. Like this is like comparable to the US taking on Mexico or something. Like there's no real threat from Mexico, but the what is Hamas trying to do here? Like, what is the purpose of this enormous attack on Israel? Because they know there's going to be a response. Yep. Like, they know that if they go in and horrifically kill, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of civilians in the most gruesome, brutal ways, they're not going to be painted with anything other than the brush of absolute heathens that need to be wiped off the face of the earth by the Israelis. And they know the Israelis have the support of the US. So why have they made this attack? Well, there's kind of a few reasons. Number one is that Gaza has been a humanitarian crisis for a long time now. Like, it's described as an open air prison by lots of reporters who have been there, and the fact that it's blockaded by Israel because they're worried about Hamas getting resources in to be able to stage attacks means that, the average person there is suffering enormously. And so Hamas doesn't really have a lot of options to fight this war, which they want, because they, the Israelis believe it's their land, the Palestinians believe it's their land. So what do? They stage a horrific terrorist attack, which goads Israel into, going to war. Now, all the countries around them are Muslim countries that had to be kind of bribed with the Abraham Accords by Trump and his people into leaving Israel alone. Now, if Israel invades Gaza and if Israel, ramps up its humanitarian kind of oppression of the Palestinians, this is Hamas's plan, is hoping that the Muslim countries will end the Abraham Accords and jump in to fight Israel for real. And then we're in a hot war. And the US has already pledged support. And Australia, no doubt, will be involved because Australia goes and fights all these things. So by this kind of step-by-step, attack, overreaction, that's how you end up with a world war. If there's any history buffs that among us, like World War One, how did World War One start? Well, okay,
it was in the Balkans with the Serbians. There was just a little war between Serbia and Austria-Hungary.
Well, so why did that end up being a world war? Because post-industrial revolution, all of Europe has this enormous access to new weapons, to weapons that they've never been able to imagine before. We've gone from fighting with bows and arrows to fighting with guns, tanks, not tanks yet, but guns and ammunition, and trench warfare is completely new. And so what are they going to do with all these new powers, these new weapons of destruction? They're worried that there's going to be a war, so they entrench themselves in these really big alliances. Huge countries allied with other huge countries to deter other countries from touching them, so that there's this huge maze of alliances, which means that no one can afford to attack first, because then everyone's at war. And this idea of, it's the same theory behind mutually assured destruction with nuclear bombs, is that, no one can afford this kind of destruction. And so war is avoided at all costs. But of course, what happened, it's such a delicate balance that if anyone does go to war, then everyone else has to jump in. And the way it ended up happening was a Serbian killed an Austrian in the Balkans, and then Austria declared war on Serbia, and then Russia had an agreement, and then England was involved, and then suddenly everyone was involved because of this entrenched alliance system. And we have the biggest loss of human life in human history up until that point, where Australians were getting slaughtered in Turkey for no reason. Like, what possible reason do Australians have to do with Franz Ferdinand getting shot to go and die in Turkey? And that's the risk here.
To forge our national identity. I mean, come on.
You're right, actually. Those 18-year-old boys who were tricked into going to war, good for them. They forged our national identity. So
and got us some good bickies as well. So,
is it worth it for the Anzac biscuits?
That's a good question. Comment below if it is.
Was the slaughter of innocent Australian young men who were tricked into going to war because they were told it was an adventure to protect the motherland of Britain, was it worth it for the biscuits? We're asking the hard questions here. Tragedies, obviously. Tragedies, like, enormous, and the kind of thing where it's the sort of war that redefines like how humans look at themselves. Like humans who were anywhere near that war never wanted to go to war ever again, and unfortunately had to not too long afterwards, because they've seen like these horrors that are unimaginable to like you and I who have never seen them. And that's the situation that is is in front of us every time that we have one of these sort of things. So that language by Biden to say no matter what, no matter what, Israel has our support. Emboldens Israel to do whatever they want rather than sue for peace, which is obviously what we're all advocating, is like, hey, there has to be some sort of solution here. There has to be some way to sue for peace, even if it involves giving up land or something. Is that not worth people dying? Because the Abraham Accords that Trump was pushing have shown that these countries can get along. They can, not in a particularly happy manner, but they can live in peace if there is maybe some exchange of land, maybe some sort of monetary agreement or something. Now, of course, the Abraham Accords were all funded by the American taxpayer, so it's not a libertarian ideal anyway. But there has to be some way to stop the fighting. And, as horrific as it is, your citizens being killed brutally in the way that they were, the instinctive reaction is we have to do something about this. We have to punish them for what they've done. When was the last time that trying to punish terrorists for what they've done led to an enormous 20-year failed war in the Middle East? That's right. 9/11.
Yeah.
Does anyone, even the most ardent neocons, does anyone defend those 20 years of war now?
Yes,
considering
because it stopped further terrorist attacks because we had them pinned down, and Saddam Hussein was an evil person and he had to be stopped. I'm being facetious here, but there are people who still defend that. But I get what you're saying, and yeah, it's a tragedy. But I think the idea of stopping the war is by just totally invading and just taking over and just crushing Hamas so that this doesn't happen again. I think that's legitimately the idea that they have, kind of bypassing the loss of life. Well, I'm sure that they're outweighing there's going to be more loss of life if we don't just come in and obliterate them and kill them all. Just do it quick, overnight, and it'll be fine. We're not going to have any retribution from the other Muslim countries. Russia's not going to weigh in. China's not going to weigh in. It's just going to be the US wanting to assert its imperialism again.
Yeah, and there's always the argument for war is always so like, it's always something like that, some sort of consequentialist argument. It's like, oh well, if we don't do this, then we're letting Hamas know that they can bomb and take and steal and whatever at any given point. And there's you can't, it's unfalsifiable. It's saying, well, if we don't do this, then that is obviously going to happen. And you're like, well, no, that's not obvious, but you can say that. Like, of course you can say that. Anyone can say that. It's like, so the other big sort of thing I've noticed that's come out of all of this is, have you heard anything more about Ukraine and Russia recently?
A little bit, but these are more from the libertarian people who are just kind of reminding you that Russia-Ukraine's going on, but no major reporting. So, yeah.
Well, so like defending Ukraine was the most important thing in the world for the last year. It was like, we have to stop Putin. Putin has to be stopped here. And obviously, like it sucks that you even have to give these disclaimers, but obviously Putin invading another country is not something that libertarians support. It's not something that we support. But given the context that that's happened, and it's happened through provocation from the West since the end of the Soviets by pushing NATO further and further that way, then like the solution isn't necessarily fund Ukraine to weaken Russia to the ends of the earth. Like that's not a given. But what did the war hawks all say? What were they all saying when, to anyone who sort of pushed back to funding Ukraine with a blank check, no matter what? Well, if Putin invades Ukraine, which he wants to, Putin's a maniac. He wants all of Europe. He wants all of Europe. If you let Putin take Ukraine, he's going to go for the rest. He's going to go for the big win. Which, does anyone think that now? Like, is there anyone even like who genuinely think, and who it's not just a talking point for? Is there anyone who genuinely thinks now, given how much Putin has struggled just to take little scraps of Ukraine, that he's going to invade Europe? And then further, if we don't defend Ukraine, then China's going to take Taiwan, obviously.
Yeah.
Because obviously. You
Because
know,
you look weak. You can't capitulate or be perceived as capitulating, because then you're going to be weak for some reason, as opposed to China being like, hey, they're going to defend Taiwan. They've got one of the largest military, but they didn't defend Ukraine. So fuck it, we're just going to go in and invade Taiwan.
because everyone knows that nothing looks weaker than not killing they're not causing the death of a whole bunch of innocent people. There's nothing stronger than, inadvertently causing pain and suffering half a world away, and doing it on the dime of your taxpayers who are already struggling to pay off, anything. And so, this whole the whole point of it is that now, like, no one's talking about Ukraine because no one actually believed that consequentialist argument. That it wasn't true. It's just that in the moment when they need you to support the war or the lockdown or the mandate or the voice or any of these, largely statist causes, in that moment, they can push the propaganda so loudly and so, forcefully and so unilaterally, and so that you can't turn anywhere without hearing those talking points, that it seems like it's it's inevitable. Like, of course that's the truth. Everyone's saying it. And it's only by kind of reflecting and looking at the absurdities of the things that they were saying that you realize that it's all a lie. And that it's all a lie now that, we have to support Israel in whatever military conquest to the ends of the earth. Of course it's a lie. It'll be an obvious lie in 2 years.
Don't forget that the media is also going to put in little parts and say, oh, Hamas is good, or Russia is kind of doing something. So it's going to make them seem fair and balanced, for use of a better term. So it's going to play that Hegelian dialectic even more, of just pretending to be, but really we're pushing propaganda. But look, we out of the 20 articles we did, there's one about Russia maybe being okay, or there's one about Hamas. So we're actually representing both sides of the argument.
Yeah, you've just described the ABC perfectly. The publicly funded Australian broadcasting channel, which shows 99% of the time something that's left pushing, and because it shows 1% the time something that's not super biased or somewhat right leaning, they're like, hey, look, both sides. Look at these both sides that we're showing. The other thing that is worth mentioning is, so talking about this, so largely the Ukraine-Russia war had lost public support in the US, certainly. Like it was becoming, it was part of the reason that Trump was surging in the polls, because he's saying all the right things about ending the conflict there. It's part of the reason why RFK was taking such a big chunk of the Democrat vote before he went independent, which he's just gone independent, because it's not popular. It had become, the propaganda had already, it was forceful enough to get them into the war, and it was forceful enough to get into funding Ukraine for the war, and it was forceful enough to get that initial support, but it didn't have that lasting sort of effect that they wanted. And so because it was losing popularity in the US, it's an obvious shift now. Hey, Israel, our allies, when the US has such a huge Jewish community and population, and a huge Jewish lobby as well, perfect. This is one we can absolutely justify. And hey, Ukraine's not our ally, but Israel's literally our ally, guys. Like, obviously, we're going to fund it. So it's way more palatable to fund this war as well as Ukraine, and they'll keep funding Ukraine a little bit. But a lot of the fear among libertarians for what was happening in Ukraine was that because of all this US support and Western support and Australian support, because we sent our, hundreds of millions, if not $1 billion of support to Ukraine as well, what it was doing was it was emboldening the Ukrainians into going all out into this war and losing more and more and more civilians, rather than suing for peace. And the peace might have looked like some loss of territory. And it probably should have looked like some loss of territory. And I remember arguing with people at the time. And, if you said, well, they should sue for peace and maybe they lose the territory. And they were like, what? So you let Putin win? Yeah. What kind of message is that? You just invade wherever you want and Putin wins? You idiot. You Russophile, Putin-loving piece of shit. Well, what's
Or
happening now?
you get the inverse of, you're going to let Ukraine stay around and not let Putin do his manifest destiny.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yes, the adverse. And but what's going to happen now? What's going to happen now? The US funding of Ukraine is less popular. If they end the funding, which they eventually do, what did the US do? They pushed Boris Johnson and they sent him to tell Zelensky not to negotiate with Putin, even though they had a tentative peace agreement in April of 2022. And that was reported by Fiona Hill, who is an establishment, an establishment character for time, since time immemorial, across 3 presidents, I think. And so, like, that's not a controversial, like, that's a known thing that Boris Johnson did that. So what Ukraine continued the war under the assurances of England and under the assurances of the US, and Boris Johnson was sent there by the US, and that's, like, obviously. And what did they do? So they continued this war and sent so many, I don't even know the figure, probably hundreds of thousands of people to die. And now what's the outcome going to be? They're not going to get funded anymore, or the funding is going to slow, or it's going to stop, and Putin's going to take the territories he wants anyway, which they could have sued for peace for, and they could have not wasted human lives for. And that, like, once again, it's a case of, the consequentialist argument was, hey, what are you gonna give Putin his win for free? No, I'm not going to give it to him for free. I'm going to, push a whole bunch of Ukrainians to die first. I need a few more Ukrainians to die so that Putin doesn't just get his free win. So that he had to, and a bunch of Russians have to die as well. We need heaps and heaps and heaps of people to die for the same outcome, so that Putin's ego is not fed. Yes, that's the humanitarian solution here. Sorry, I've ranted a bit today, but
Really?
You're up. I mean, any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I just think it's more bullshit being propagated as by the media and by, as you said, these branches within the US. It's very interesting to look at as far as the right-left support of Israel. Obviously, you've got a lot of people on the left saying, Hamas is good, Israel bad. But then you've got, people like the Anti-Defamation League, who you'd say are on the left. But then they're going to support Israel, obviously. And so then it kind of curves the left back and says, wait a second, this could be a good thing, because we actually don't want Hamas to take any territories. You're kind of like putting the argument forward that Israel is the justified person here. And it's great when you are attacked. And you mentioned before, what's causing this to be attacked. I mean, obviously, it's out of a sense of desperation to go up against Israel. And that really being subjugated and not looking at the reasons why and saying, well, why has Hamas done this? What's the situation like? Maybe we should, you've got all those little I was going to say parliamentary inquiries, but the US equivalent of that. Fuck it, let's do one in Australia of why exactly Hamas is attacking. Maybe before we go in and just obliterate them so that they can't even talk about why they've done what they've done. So it really is. It seems like a knee-jerk reaction. Who knows how much of a knee-jerk reaction it is? But I think it's just absurd that we're going to rush towards warfare, like we did with Russia, Ukraine, no matter what side you are on. And for this, we're all going to seem to get on Israel's side, at least from a power broker point of view, and say, all right, this is justified. Let's go out. Let's keep killing. And, everyone for some reason is just going to back it, or at least not talk about it.
Yeah. And that's that power broker point is, if you're going to play power broker, if that's the role that you want to play, like the US wants to play, then this will always come up. There is a million humanitarian causes that you can fight a war over. Like pick anywhere in Africa you can fight a war over it and call it a humanitarian reason. You can justify anything, and what's more is you can get tied down into a war, even the ones that you don't pick. Like, let's say in the most optimistic view of US foreign policy is that, let's say they don't want this war. They have to. They have to now support Israel and have to back them to time immemorial, whether they do a parliamentary inquiry or whatever it's called or not, because they have decided that they're playing this role of, world police. And there's this, this idea, and countries and a terrorist group, which is as underfunded and as weak comparatively militarily as Hamas, can strong arm the US into a conflict because of this, entanglement of alliances, and because of this view that the US has of itself, that it is the world police. And there's no way you can do this foreign policy in a peaceful or humane way while you maintain this view of yourself as, your military is what's going to keep peace in the world. And there's just no way. Like this war is one of a billion wars that we'll have to protest and argue against as we go forward, because there's limitless ways that they can be pushed into one or choose one. And the other thing is, as we talked about last time, is war is the health of the state. Like the whole. Did you know that there is like a cost of living crisis in the US and in Australia and everywhere else?
No, I didn't. I definitely didn't.
Did you notice that, like, it's really expensive to buy groceries and it's really expensive to buy anything, and interest rates are going up because of the ridiculous rampant spending they did during COVID? Well, why aren't we looking backwards at why this cost of living has occurred and all the stupid policies that they've done? No, because there's a war in the Middle East. And, now we can all unite as, hold on, that's right, I forgot. We're the good guys. We're the good guys again. Yeah, we can go and stop a humanitarian crisis over there because we're the good guys. And now we get to all feel good about ourselves and our country again.
Well, there is a saying as well: war's the best way to get out of a recession or a depression. So, I think the benefit is going to be, well, at least we can get our economy back. At least there's something that's going to happen back home, because, we're on the other side of the world. It doesn't affect us. We shouldn't think about those people, because it's just right now, it's not like you're even reading about it. You just see it on a screen. Like you've seen all your Netflix shows, like you've seen everything else. It's just Rambo, but IRL.
I got to disagree with you there, because, like, yes, I know that sentiment that, war is the best way to get out of a recession. I think it comes from the fact that, the Great Depression of the 30s was largely avoided, or largely brought to a close, you could argue, because the US in World War II, prior to becoming involved, so they didn't have the massive destruction on their homeland, was selling loads and loads and loads of weaponry to the warring countries, and therefore made an awful lot of money, and then found themselves with all this gold at the end of World War II, and hence why they brought in the gold standard, because they had all of this gold from having made all this money and sold all these weapons. That's not what's happening here, though. Let's look at Australia. Let's look at the US. Nobody's making money from these wars, barring weapons manufacturers. But the money is not coming from Israel buying our weaponry, or Israel buying the US's weaponry, or Ukraine buying the US's weaponry. It's coming from the US giving them the weaponry, or giving them the money to then buy the weaponry from. So the weapons manufacturers and the corporations, hand in hand with the government, yeah, they're getting money. But it's not the overall, like, the burden on the taxpayer and the debt that this is costing is in the negative by a lot. So I like this. This war won't, I don't think, give any get out of the recession. If anything, it'll accelerate it.
But that being said, you're sending all this money over, then maybe you turn around when it's all done, buy some treasury bonds. Maybe buy some of those treasury bonds that China's dumping. Maybe do it to keep the US dollar propped up. and avoid this BRICS yuan situation
Who,
happening.
like that's so, we'll do this if you do this. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
you wash
Yeah,
my
okay.
hand, I'll wash yours type of thing.
Yeah, and look, I'm sure there's some of that probably involved, but I mean it's certainly not sustainable. Are we gonna keep sending for wars forever? And like it's not
Yes.
going to happen. Wait, are you telling me that the plan is perpetual war?
And I'm not. George Orwell was.
Yeah, what is it?
War is peace.
We've always been at war with East Asia. What do you mean? We've always been at war with East Asia. There's never Eurasia. Anyway, so that's, and look, that idea that the US is no longer doing what it used to be doing. The US is too poor to be funding these wars now. Like if you think about that's the other thing, is they're still acting like there's still this facade of the world police and the we are the dominant world power. The US is crumbling from the inside out. There, what, 30 something trillion dollars in debt. Inflation there, inflation here, interest rates there, interest rates here are all comparable. The average person in the US is poor and struggling. The comparison that I would make is during the Cold War, right? US capitalist, Soviet Russia communist. The US largely, the nuclear arms race, and everyone was pointing a million nukes at each other, and it was this both an ideological divide between the two, but also they were the two world powers, and we were going to see which system works better, whether it's capitalism or communism. And invariably, capitalist enterprise was beating communism. But for a long time, even though the country was hollowed out from the inside because everyone was poor and they were starving, and there was no food to eat, and all the rest of it, the military and the facade that they painted was one of strength, and they had all the nukes. Like the last thing, people didn't have food to eat, but we had the nukes, or they had the nukes, the Soviets, right? But they were hollowed out from the inside. That's what I see as what's happening in the US now. Like the inside is hollowed out. Like the average person is losing the value of their savings at breakneck pace and can't afford to do anything. And the welfare state is expanding, and the state, these bureaucracies that don't create anything and do nothing but leech off productive work in the US is expanding, and their dollar is only propped up because of the fact that they take these actions to undermine BRICS, but also because of the petrodollar and the fact that they have this military dominance everywhere. It's all this house of cards that's about to fall. It's all hollowed out, but on the surface, on the front, they are strong. And we're going to send all the aid to Israel, and we're going to fight all these wars. We're going to send all the aid to Ukraine and whatnot. It's to me, it's an exact, one-to-one comparison. Not one-to-one. There's obviously other factors, but it's a very similar comparison to what was happening in the Soviet Union just prior to its collapse.
Yeah, but that's what you have to do. You have to have the strong facade. I think that's the most important thing in the idea of look strong. People will assume you're strong. You can have all this information coming in internally, but still, if the countries say, well, they've got that military power there, I may not want to mess with them, because regardless of what's going on, at least they'll be able to deploy, fighter jets and ground forces and whatever. They'll put their warships in my sea now. So I think it is important for them to keep up the facade, and it doesn't really matter, because still the Soviets had that facade and they were still our enemy. Well, the enemy of the West, I shouldn't say our, for 40, 50 years. And there was that real threat of communism until the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union disbanded. There was this perpetual threat of communism. So I think and until it does crumble, people are going to be scared, and they do have to put that up. And I understand from a perspective of the person, that they need to rebuild that, or they need to look at other avenues to look after themselves. And I strongly empathize with that. But as far as from a geopolitical point of view, I think it is the most important thing for them just to look scary, be the puffer fish, and the puffer fish can actually poison you and kill you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's this whole the whole idea that for them to admit that they aren't that world power, or for them to make any sort of scaling back or concession in regards to how they've conducted themselves, since World War II, ostensibly, as the dominant, world police type of thing. If they make a concession there, they have to admit and they have to make an enormous change on the home front. Like the idea that the state is all powerful cannot be consistent if all of these have been lies and they're not able to be this dominant world power. So they're never going to admit it, as you said. Like it's the first thing that would have to happen for them to admit that they don't do this, world policing type thing, is that the state is not dominant on the home front. So there's no way. And of course, the libertarian solution here, the libertarian ideal, is that both are scaled back. Like that is what needs to be scaled back. They go in tandem. They are both symptoms of the same problem. The enormous taxation and authoritarianism on the home front is, part and parcel with the authoritarianism on the geopolitical front. So I mean, they're going to have to be strong-armed into it by the collapse, I think, or the imminent recession, or the collapse of everything, the way that the Berlin Wall fell. I think I don't know if it'll be something as sudden as that. It may be just a slow, continuous impoverishing of everyone, and for a long time yet. But unless one of them goes, the other can't go.
Well, I think internally, it requires the people, and that doesn't apply to America. That applies to everyone, where people have got to, the people on the home front have to make that realization and say, hey, we want this change, as opposed to just going along with it, or at least questioning what's going on. So I think anything on an internal perspective, you have to have the people there ready to, I don't want to say rise up, but at least say lobby for change, as opposed to the Israel lobby and the armaments lobby lobbying for what they want. The people saying, no, we're not going to go along with this, whether that's mass non-compliance, whether that is a revolution or something like that. It's going to have to come from them, and people can't expect that it's going to happen just on its own.
I mean, if we're continuing to quote Orwell's 1984, I think this is the direct quote. If there is hope, it's in the proles, like the proletariat.
Correct.
That's I guess that's the essence of what you're saying. And I think a perfect example of where this is happening is, so we've talked about on the show a few times, Javier Milei in Argentina, who seems to be, knock on wood, no assassinations, no anything. Anything sort of underhanded or election stealing, which I'm sure they're trying to do, but may become, may take control in Argentina, may gain power. The reason that they've had this enormous rise up of the populace that is willing to support a libertarian who is an anarcho-capitalist, no less, a dirty ANCAP, who is railing against the central banks, and calling the left and the communists the worst scourge on humanity, and all this like extreme libertarian anarcho-capitalist message that we love, but which has no traction anywhere here. The reason that it's managed to find a foothold in Argentina is because their country has crumbled in terms of financially, monetarily. I think they've had a 100% increase in inflation in the last year or something like that. There was some devaluing of their dollar to the point that like no one knows what anything is worth of anything, and the market can't function because it's all up in the air. And when something like that happens, you're more susceptible to an extreme message by someone who has the actual solution, has the real hard solution.
I know people talk about the idea of it has to be a crisis, but people also talk about the idea of getting people ready for that? Or, does it have to come to that? Can we, the people, subvert this? And I understand that just like in 1984, the proles did have their beer and they had, the lottery and things like that, keeping them dumbed down and really subsided. But I guess it's that argument of, do we have to wait for that for it to happen, or can we achieve it now? I mean, it's a hard slog, but I think people have to be ready for that. And I think it starts with things like this, and it starts with questioning the war, and it starts with just talking to people and saying, hey, what's going on with this? Why do you agree? Oh, I think drilling it down to, I agree because the news tells me. All right, well, why do you agree with the news? So I think we don't have to wait for Argentina, and we can just get ready, start talking, and that's the way you do it. You start talking and start sharing the show on social media.
Yes, like, share, and subscribe. Yeah, well, I guess, look, the Argentinian election, I don't know if I mentioned that before, I think is today, so they're a little bit behind in time zone. So yeah, so we're gonna know possibly by the time this episode comes out, that we will know whether Javier Milei got in or not.
So we're having a show tomorrow then.
Yeah, well, I guess we may have to.
So let's do predictions now. Do you reckon he gets in or not?
Do I reckon he gets in? So there's four alternatives.
Yeah.
In and not assassinated. In and assassinated.
Yep.
Not in, not assassinated. Not in, assassinated. I'd say that last one's probably quite unlikely. If he doesn't get in, who's going to assassinate him? Look, obviously, I'm an optimist. Not really, but in this case, I'm going to be in and not assassinated is my prediction.
Cool.
You?
Yeah, fuck it. Let's just say he gets in. I mean, it's going to be a lot more interesting if he does. So why not?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, it's going well. And that's the other thing is, if he gets in and assassinated, do they create a martyr? That is
exactly. Yeah.
And then there's a civil war in Argentina, and the US can fund that as well. Perfect. And
that'd be good.
We can send our young soldiers to go die over there, because that's a humanitarian crisis that can't be ignored, just like Ukraine was.
If it's a libertarian side, then it means we can go over to Argentina and fight for the libertarians.
Sign me up. I've made a lot of anti-war rhetoric this whole time, but actually, when there's a cause that I support, I will kill innocent civilians.
Well, no, if we're still talking about Orwell here. Orwell's my favorite author. I love Homage to Catalonia and the idea of like the militias there. And I know they were all like communists and anarcho-communists, but it's like, yeah, cool, anarchist militia. That sounds pretty interesting. I don't know if I'd fucking go. Honestly, I don't think I have the balls to go, but it would be interesting if you get these anarchist and libertarian militias springing up. I mean, they're pretty well armed in the US.
Yeah, like every time one of those sorts of things comes up, I'm like, yeah, that sounds fucking cool. I will go there. But then I remember that I, like you, am a little bitch. I would not survive one day in that environment. I am, I'm a teacher by trade because manual labor is too much for me. So, I'm not going to actually go fight not out of I would absolutely kill innocent civilians if it were for a cause that I believed in, obviously, because that's the nature of hypocrisy. But no, it's a bit much for me.
Yeah.
Sorry, to harken back to an earlier point that you were making. You said that we don't have to wait for Argentina. Like, can we point at this sort of, the lies in the media and the shortfalls and lies of the government and the way that they manipulate us to try and get this movement of libertarians or, anti-state non-compliance people going before there is a crisis? And I think that it's important to note that as libertarians in a Western country that doesn't have an enormous appetite for libertarianism, that's exactly the gamble that we're making. We're saying, that it would be absurd to put this much time into, even something like this podcast, or just even into conversations, or even into joining the Libertarian Party, or even into campaigning in any way during an election. It would be absurd to put this amount of time into something if there was no hope. If there was no chance of some actual, the rational person, if they, even believe in libertarian views, but sees no chance of it happening before the collapse, doesn't do anything about it. So, I mean, it's a gamble that we're taking, and I suppose it shows how naive we are in thinking that we can actually make some sort of change. But
No, come on, we can make change. I think it's that type of attitude that stems it all and has people going like, well, yeah, I'll kind of do it, but nothing's going to happen. I think things can happen. Don't doubt the power of humanity.
yeah, no, I mean, I suppose um, I have great hope, but the realism of looking like the reason we do any of it is because we have this great hope that there is a chance to wake a whole bunch of people up, and sometimes there is an opportunity presents itself, like say with COVID. The number of libertarians exploded by a factor of 10 or something. There are these opportunities, but they need to be steeped in the realism that this is a hostile world to libertarian views. Like this view is radical as anything. Even the most mild libertarian who says we just need to shrink the size of the public sector by a little bit is radical compared to the mainstream, zygote of Australia. And that's something that I suppose that's where my pessimism might sound like it's coming out. It's a realism that we can be hopeful and we can be optimistic, but this is absolutely an uphill battle that's happening right now.
Yeah, but you can still talk about it though. It's not like you're not gonna get shot for talking about it. You're not gonna get put in jail yet. So I don't think it is necessarily dangerous or anything like that just to talk to people. And I guess it's talking the right way though as well. Like, I mean, I'm pretty shit at it. That's something I have to really, it's like one of my skills I have to learn is to be able to talk to people about this stuff. But at least you try and get people questioning, maybe not even like a libertarian point of view, but just people to ask questions, so they can drink some hemlock like Socrates.
I mean, as you said, it's not dangerous in any real way yet. And I mean, obviously, as I've said, we are both little bitches. So if it were dangerous in even the slightest way, in a real manner, we would put some serious thought into turning into commies, I think. No, I'm kidding. That was a joke. That was an absolute joke. But so what would you say? We're almost at the hour mark. Let me ask you an academic question then.
Yeah. Oh, look out.
I mean, it's not that academic, but so what, given that we do need to find some sort of way to reach the mainstream, out of all the current available arsenal of talking points that you have, what do you think is the most powerful to reaching the average person, the average Australian, in seeing that, that ultimate lie that the government is not inevitable and benevolent as we libertarians say that it isn't?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm not really sure. I probably would just focus on the idea of maybe bureaucracy and kind of pointing it to the fact that if you scale it all back, all the crap goes. Your 15-minute city type of thing. I wouldn't bring up 15-minute cities specifically. I think that's something really important to talk about though. But like your idea of why do you have to go 40 kilometers in these areas when you're really not going to hit anyone? Are you going to hit children in school zones? Do you have to do this? The needs, I think the needs of the few sometimes outweigh the needs of the many. So I wouldn't really put like a populist argument, but it's like, why do we have to do all these little bullshit things? And you find what's relevant to one person. I mean, if you talk to a tradie, it's like, well, why do you have to do all this bullshit OH&S stuff? Things like that. So that's one thing I do like to talk about is the bureaucracy, and I think that gets through to a lot of people. But then it's like, well, what from here? And I don't know what from here, but I think You know, why not? Fuck it, just go with the whole Bitcoin argument, and let's just start using Bitcoin and just subvert the economy and bring it all down and start the gray market.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you that you got to scale it to the person that you're talking to. I mean, I suppose the question was almost, if you had the biggest microphone that you'll ever have, and you were pointing it at all of Australia, what do you say? What is the thing that you try to say to convert the most amount of people? And I suppose my answer chops and changes depending on what's happening. I think at the moment it's war. It's the this like trying to get people to correlate the true brutality of war and not see it as, you know, as you said, the Netflix series that's happening across the globe, and you know, this horror, this like the absolute worst thing that human beings can do in tearing each other up limb from limb with machines, and correlating that with why does this happen, and it's almost always at the nexus of state intervention, state power. I was talking about World War I before, like the idea that a random Australian 18-year-old kid goes and gets shot by a random Turkish fighter with whom he has nothing to disagree with. And then if he survives that, goes onto the Western Front and sits in a trench and either dies of disease or gets shot in the head by some fucking German who doesn't want to be there either. Like all of these human lives that are subverted and lost and sent against each other. And even if they do survive, their soul is destroyed from having, you know, the humans are repulsed by the idea of generally of taking human life. And yet these average people do it in times of war. And all of it comes down to being the fault of the state. All of it, every single time. These people are not killing each other if it's not for the state.
They come home, and what does the state do? It venerates them. It makes them heroes, that you accept it.
Of course, because how does it justify the next war if it doesn't venerate the ones who went on their killing sprees before? Anyway, that's I don't know exactly how to make that point in a way that can hit the most Australians, but I think it's important every time a war crops up to use it, like to use it as a jumping off point. It's like, look what's happening here. Like, yes, you're hearing about the terrorist Hamas and how we have to support Israel, but look at how these children, because, you know, the median age in Gaza is 18 years old. 50% of the population there is under the age of 18. Look at how these children are dying and how these innocents are dying in Israel. And all of this is stuff that's come from, you know, it's all the culmination of historical state intervention through, you know, whatever, back to the British putting the giving the state of Israel to the Israelis. Like it's all of it is death and destruction that currently occurs can always be drawn back to the state. So manipulating every one of these events to cast the blame directly on this thing that exists here. You know, it's like, it's not just the state there, it's the state here. They all operate to the same incentives.
Yeah, that's a valid point, because look at what Iraq and Afghanistan did. You got a lot of people out there and disagreeing with it. So no, I definitely do think that is valid. And I think that's the thing for libertarians is what is that message? What is getting it across? So, you know, let's give it a shot. Let's talk about war to some people.
Let's
get fired from our fucking jobs because we just jump on and just say, wait a second, what's going on with this fucking war?
What the fuck?
I'm going to a bar tonight and I'm just going to have a chat about it. But no, for sure.
Perfect. You're going to a bar, make sure you talk about the atrocities happening in the Middle East. That's always a really good way to make new friends. Is
rock up
hey guys, nice to meet you.
Do that. Yeah.
You're going to an RSL, are you?
Yeah, well, in theory, I'm going to an RSL and talking about why war's bad.
Well, yeah.
If I'm not here in the next show, you know what's going on. You'll have your memorial to me.
Yeah, we'll venerate you as a true hero because you died in an actually honorable way. Cool. All right, we'll we'll leave it there for today.
Yep.
I hope it hasn't been too racist and anti-Semitic for you guys watching. If you don't already, please do like, subscribe, and all the rest of it. It helps us. Subscribe on YouTube. That's so you can keep following our racist tirades. We'll catch you next time. Bye.
Peace.